Ms. Nakamitsu, thank you very much for joining us. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you in our studio. And your visit to Astana is somehow connected to the occasion of the International Day of Nuclear against the nuclear tests. And I wonder, why did you pick exactly Kazakhstan to visit on the eve of this event? As far as you know, Kazakhstan also closed its Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. Yes. So I think maybe there is a link between these events.
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me. The official reason why I came here is, of course, with the government of Kazakhstan. We are co-organizing this workshop on nuclear weapon-free zones, which is still being held at the Foreign Ministry conference room. And so yesterday I opened that conference. And but also it was very important for me to visit Kazakhstan again, as Kazakhstan is actually one of the very strongest leaders of nuclear weapon related issues. As you say, International Day Against Nuclear Test is on the 29th of August. It's in the margins of that time period. It was initiated by Kazakhstan, as you know, and now it has become a very important commemoration of nuclear tests. And it was on the occasion of course, Semipalatinsk closure. And so, you know, for the United Nations, it's very important to have a very close dialogue and consultations with the government officials. I had an excellent meeting with the foreign minister and, of course, with His Excellency, the President as well, to discuss some of the key, you know, joint priorities for Kazakhstan and, of course, for the United Nations, and for me, to thank the government of Kazakhstan for the strong leadership and support for my office on many related issues.
How do you think, what's the role of countries like Kazakhstan and the whole Central Asian region for assisting the global efforts against the nuclear tests, nuclear weapons, disarmament in general? Right.
I mean, actually, Kazakhstan is a strong leader in several different fronts related to nuclear disarmament. Of course, the International Day Against Nuclear Testing, I mean, you are one of the initiators, strong voices against nuclear tests, a very strong advocate and a supporter for CTBT, Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And, you know, the whole issues related to nuclear testing at the United Nations, you know, you are the leader and the leading voice for those issues. But it's not limited to nuclear testing. For example, this year we had a second preparatory meeting of the NPT, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. And that second preparatory committee meeting was chaired by Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan is one of the leadership of those NPT process currently. And also next year in March,
in New York, right?
Yes, there is this third meeting of states parties of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, another very important international treaty mechanism related to the elimination of nuclear weapons.
What are your hopes for this conference?
Well, we hope that there will be, you know, a strong sort of movement towards really, you know, developing, strengthening this new treaty. TPNW is still a new treaty mechanism. There are many work that still needs to be done to increase the number of states parties, you know, universalization efforts, developing, you know, the kinds of mechanisms, which is very new approach in the nuclear disarmament field, you know, victims assistance, environmental remediation efforts. All these issues actually are under the leadership of Kazakhstan. It's not just in the TPNW framework, but also to the General Assembly, Kazakhstan, together with Kiribati, a Pacific nation.
So the new mechanism are going to be discussed. So are there any announcement that need to be done? I mean, what are they will be focused on? Maybe with the new angle?
So we recently did a Secretary General's report on victims assistance issues, and one of the things that was promoted in that you know, SG report sort of drafting was a potential establishment of a trust fund, voluntary trust fund, so that the victims will be really assisted. And we hope that those discussions will also make some progress in the context of a General Assembly, in addition to the treaty mechanisms in TPNW. So that's another front that you are leading. And then, of course, this workshop that we are currently doing in Kazakhstan, issues related to nuclear weapon-free zones. Of course, you are, again, an initiator of the Central Asian free zone. The treaty, the agreement was signed in Semipalatinsk. It's very symbolic meaning. And the work that we are doing together with Kazakhstan and a couple of other countries now is to make sure that those different free zones, there are several different free zones around the world, they'll be able to work together more closely, share information, share lessons learned, and potentially also, feed into the ongoing process of creating a new free zone, for example, in the Middle East. And potentially, in the environment of very difficult security conditions today, there might be other areas, other regions of the world that might be interested in considering such free zones in the future. So we want to make sure that there will be good sort of brainstorming, good visionary discussions that will lead to that sort of a future progress in those free zone issues. So it's been a very interesting conversations we've been having here in Astana.
So now you already touched on the situation, overall situation around nuclear disarmament. And as we know, the NPT was signed in 1945, but still, after this year, even though countries signed this document, there are other countries who became nuclear armed after this event. Which soft power, perhaps, mechanism would you use against these countries, or to somehow, balance these countries, especially taking into account Middle Eastern region, which is always, have these geopolitical tensions?
No, I think it's very important. I mean, first and foremost, the geopolitical situation, the security environment in the world is actually going towards a very concerning, very worrying situation. The big powers with nuclear weapons, they are in a very competitive path. It's the tension between them definitely increasing. And of course, you mentioned the Middle East, but also in Ukraine, those security concerns are really there. And against these, wars and conflicts, behind those conflicts, there are always nuclear weapons issues behind it as a background. So, we say at the UN, the risks of nuclear weapons actually being used, I don't think any country would like to have a deliberate nuclear confrontations. I don't believe that. But potentially any miscalculation, misunderstandings, leading to a sudden escalation of tension, which is not contained, an uncontrollable escalation that could potentially end or result in a use of nuclear weapons. So we're living in a very dangerous environment at the moment. So the nuclear weapons issues is really at the center of all these security concerns. But for us, that is precisely why we need to actually think about how to make sure that the frameworks like the NPT remains.
How to make sure now we can see, yes, that nuclear wars are now more than real. In our today's realities. So how to balance it? I mean, exactly, because this document doesn't have obligatory, right? Obligatory character.
NPT
it's just a recommendation. So how to make it perhaps, with more convincing so that the countries cannot avoid it anyhow.
Yeah, actually the NPT has this Article 6, which is legally binding on nuclear weapon states. They are supposed to be pursuing nuclear disarmament. As you say, things are very difficult. They're not necessarily making a progress. Quite the contrary, they're going backwards. There has been qualitative nuclear arms race, modernization efforts of nuclear weapons, and potentially also in terms of numbers, nuclear weapons might be actually increasing. So it's going backwards. How do we change this situation? That's exactly why countries like Kazakhstan is so important. I read the recent article by the president on middle powers and multilateralism, and that's exactly what we think is key in those multilateral platforms, whether that is the United Nations or treaty mechanisms like NPT. It's the middle countries that can actually work to build bridges between those divided positions, huge tensions and divisions between big countries, big military powers. They can influence course of events and negotiations, and then bring those countries back towards a more peaceful and more secure path. Disarmament is not a utopian, idealistic approach. It's actually a security instrument. Throughout the history, we know that many states, especially during the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union at the time, they engaged directly with each other because they understood that uncontrollable arms race, increase of military powers will at some point backfire on them. It's not in their interest, security interest. So they, at times they really directly engaged with each other to make sure that there is diplomacy for arms control and disarmament. So it's a security instrument. And that's exactly why we need the middle powers to be working with us, so that they can build bridges, they can, influence those military powers to come to the table and then build bridges and come to a common position. So we need to work with those middle powers.
Yeah, now we can see that unfortunately NPT was not signed by the nuclear armed countries like Russia and Israel, where now are quite...
Israel is not.
Yes, at what stage are negotiations to sign this treaty this year or next year, perhaps?
Well, the NPT, we are already in the current review process. The next review conference will be in 2026. So we're in the preparatory phase.
I see.
We're
For
working,
the next one, then,
yes, and we're working very closely with Kazakhstan as one of the chairs of the preparatory meetings. And I think, the recent meeting in July in Geneva was quite successful, largely thanks to the first deputy foreign minister who was in the chair, able to really bring, able to bring those different states to agree to adopt.
So now we're closer, you want to say, to...
Yes, and then we need to keep the momentum, and then we need to make sure that there will be some sort of a consensus document to be adopted in 2026. Now, it's difficult because there are so many challenges. We need to make sure that no one will give up on the NPT. Quite the contrary, I think all states parties actually understand and share the perspective that we need to make sure that we protect NPT together. So that's the NPT process. But there are other platforms. Nuclear disarmament is, in the way, it's a very complex jigsaw puzzle. So we need to make sure that all pieces are there, and we actually look at the broader picture. Sometimes we need to invest in NPT. That's very important. TPNW is another very important instrument that is under the development. It's a new treaty, but efforts that are taking place in the UN General Assembly is another very important work. We will have the Summit of the Future in September, and there are important disarmament languages that are being negotiated as we speak in New York. So we need to utilize all these different processes and opportunities. And again, I am increasingly working very closely with the middle powers, including Kazakhstan.
So now we have two documents that play a role for the disarmament in international security in general. And experts say that there is a need of modernization of this control system, but none of them have particular idea in terms of that. What's the vision of UN office that you are
right.
responsible
Yeah, no, I mean,
for?
it's a very important point that you raise. We're now living in the age of a really rapid advancement of science and technology. Artificial
AI,
intelligence.
it's something that needs to be controlled
exactly,
too. Right.
And cybersecurity, outer space, prevention of militarization of outer space, etc. So we need to actually look at all these new and emerging technologies and really understand the impact of those technologies on disarmament and international security. So again, the process of many of those discussions have started. The AI discussions, I spend so much time now looking at AI issues, and member states are very, very interested. And that also links with nuclear disarmament as well. I mean, if you imagine, I mean, it's a scary prospect, but if artificial intelligence were to be fully integrated into nuclear weapons control, command and control systems, that's a very scary thought. So we need to make sure that we start establishing guardrails and norms of how to and how not to use technologies for military purposes. So
perhaps they can even help instead of,
Yes, and at the same time, as you say, those technologies can be also useful. How to verify disarmament obligations. If we can utilize artificial intelligence, I'm sure we will be able to make some advances. So we need to look at both positive side and negative side, potential negative side.
They are quite unpredictable. Even I talked to the author of the book who's been reading on this AI tool. So they consider AI as a weapon that can be used in political and in all these conflict areas. So they say that it's not controllable. The only thing and the only way that you can use is horizontal thinking. So even the creators of it cannot actually take control over it, and that's going to be a challenge for the next century, perhaps. And coming back to the topic of our Central Asian region, we're in Kazakhstan.
Yes.
And Kazakhstan doesn't have a nuclear weapon, as well as other 5 Central Asian states. But we have neighbors like Russia, India, Pakistan, Iran, who have that. So what security measures do you think are the most important that can be given to our countries, and perhaps maybe to create some kind of an office of UN to be established here? Any prospects for that?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, number one, it's really, laudable. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic that Kazakhstan chose a nuclear weapon-free country and the zone, the whole region. I mean, that is a real sort of demonstration that you felt your country will be, Kazakhstan will be more secure without nuclear weapons. I mean, that's the whole concept of nuclear weapon-free zones. How to make sure that that will actually be the case, there are many dimensions. And I think a very important dimension is the security guarantees from other nuclear weapon states, that they would not use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states.
Yes,
that's
right.
one of the subjects that, at this workshop at the Foreign Ministry today, these participants are discussing. And for me, it's also quite an important issue. And the broader UN membership, it's increasingly a key subject matter. So that's one. And how to realize it is the diplomacy. That is multifaceted, a multi-vector diplomacy that Kazakhstan is really investing in to make sure that your security will be guaranteed and assured through the power of, very sophisticated diplomacy and negotiations. And that's why the UN, in many senses, that's why the UN, international platforms like the UN exist. And that's another reason why we really respect the path that Kazakhstan has chosen and in many senses leading in the whole region. But as you say, the region is a very volatile
Peaceful.
region. Yes.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
time,
you.
Ms. Nakamitsu. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.